Okay, it's recording anyway, so
Okay, good.
okay. Basically, can we start now?
Yeah. It's I can see you very clearly. You can see me okay, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah, no problem.
yeah. Okay, Nick. Basically, comrade, could you please introduce yourself for especially for the Tamil readers? We've been promoting, different left-wing people, especially Maoist and so on,
Right.
throughout the world, and you're one of the prominent Maoist political activists in United Kingdom for past 30 years. So could you please introduce yourself for the new readers?
Right. Basically, I'm the editor of Democracy and Class Struggle and another research blog called Political Economy Research. That's the public work that's available on the internet that people can see. I'm also a member of something in Wales called the Great Unrest Group. In fact, I'm its spokesman, which is a new movement to build a Welsh Socialist Republican Party. In Britain, I'm a member of the Coordinating Committee of the Revolutionary Communists of Britain. Yeah, and now that is not a public organisation anymore. So it's up to you what you say about that. But we have activities throughout the United Kingdom, and we're just about to organise a camp in the west of England. So we operate on a British level, and I operate at a Welsh level, which is my country.
That's great. I think that we better begin the conversation with the Greece um, changes in Greece, recent changes, the election, and so on. What we can see as a big difference between the people uprising in the other part of the world and Greece. The important and the basic difference between the, people uprising of the other part of the world and Greece is that the Greece has the political movement in Greece has a clear political leadership with a clear vision. So could you please explain about that to the new readers?
The situation in Greece is a complex situation. Obviously, the recent thing was the elections, and we've seen there that the majority of the electorate voted against austerity, but because of the Greek electoral system and its bias in terms of the leading party, which gets a bonus of 50 seats in the parliament, you will have a government of Greece which is a pro-austerity and will carry out measures on behalf of the international capital class. Now, the problem about Greece is that there has already been many developments in Greece in the last few years, and probably the most significant development, and to put things into context, is everybody thinks that democracy and elections are synonymous. The one place in the world that very clearly democracy and elections are not necessarily synonymous is Greece, because going back thousands of years, Greece is the birthplace of democracy, obviously a class-based democracy in Europe, but it always rejected representative democracy in favor of direct democracy. It never believed that anybody could represent anybody. And this spirit of direct democracy has returned in Greece in the last few years. In fact, a leading comrade of the Communist Organization of Greece, a Maoist-based organization in Greece, part of the Syrias, has written a paper called The Democracy of the Squares. This is an appeal to have a new form of democracy in Greece, not going back to anything that's old, but developing a completely new form of direct democracy, because the current system in Greece is patently breaking down. When the majority of the people want one thing and they get a government that pursues another policy, there's a crisis within representative democracy, not just in Greece, but throughout the whole of Europe at the moment. So I see that the Greek comrades have been very misrepresented. The Communist Organization of Greece stands for the direct democracy of the squares. It isn't any great believer in representative democracy, but they do participate in it tactically, because obviously they've been able to advance their cause by participating in the recent two elections. They're part of a broad coalition called Syria, as which the coalition is a reformist coalition, but they are a communist pole in the coalition. So there is a battle for revolutionary communist politics in Greece within the Syria's coalition, which will continue. Greece is, the Greek story will unfold more and more in the coming months and years. But lots of the issues that are raised in Greece aren't just relevant for Greece, they're relevant for the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. And this issue of the collapse of representative democracy, as far as I see it in Greece and in most of Europe at the moment, is very important. And the new forms of democracy that are beginning to emerge, both within Greece, within Spain, we've not seen many significant developments so far, but we've seen some attempts at developing new forms of democracy in other countries. But certainly Greece is leading the way, and certainly Spain is in this regard.
What is the percentage, the communist organization, which is the Maoist organization?
It's the second largest organization within the Syria's coalition. They joined it a few years ago. The Syria's coalition isn't that old. It's only like about 6 or 7 years old. And it's a combination of ecologists, some forms of Trotskyism, a whole host of different political forces on the left. But it was an attempt to bring... The difference is that there is already a communist party in Greece, the KKE. The KKE is an old party. It reflects past times. It has not managed to energize the youth. The youth are within the Syria's coalition. They're things like the Communist Organization of Greece. The Greek Communist Party obviously is completely opposed to the Syria's coalition, and in some way has regarded the Syria's coalition as its main enemy in Greece. But the recent victory of the Syria's coalition shows that it's a very dynamic force. Obviously, it's still dominated by reformists, and there's still a big battle to be won within the Syria. For example, it's a big debate about being in the European Union and not. The Communist Organization of Greece has a slogan, a new Greece in a new Europe. They are not intrinsically tied anyway to the European Union. They obviously prepared to leave it and are one of those forces within the Syrias that would be happy to take Greece out of the European Union, but obviously into a new form of union with other countries in Europe that probably will also at some point have to leave the European Union because of the current financial structure of the union.
That's great. What's the basic difference between KKE and communist organization? Because KKE seems to be the traditional communist party, and they have lots of experience to, of the struggle in the past. So what's the basic?
Well, yeah, the KKE obviously. Its membership is old to start with, and it's based really on the Communist Party in Greece played a very historic role following the Second World War in the Greek Civil War, and also during the military junta. I mean, I can remember in the 1960s I was collecting petitions to free communists following the military coup in about 67. The Ambitalises, Betty Ambitalis was from Wales. She married one of the leaders of the Greek Communist Party, who was the leader of the Dockers at the time. At that point, the KKE, the Communist Party during the period of the military junta and during the Civil War played exemplary roles. But since that date, they seem to have lost their way in Greece. Now, their political line, the current Communist Organization of Greece broke away. There was a Maoist breakaway, anti-divisionist breakaway. The history of the Communist Organization of Greece goes back to the breakaway from the KKE in the 1960s and 70s. So there's an evolution of an anti-divisionist movement, which has ended up now within Syria, and you have still the old. They've sometimes been called Brezhnevite, but they have criticisms of Khrushchev. They are pro-Stalin. They're KKE, but it seems to me that they really haven't grasped some of the political realities in Greece, and that their weakness is that they see the revolution probably still based on an industrial working class. They have old ideas. They don't really see the revolution in the terms of the Communist Organization of Greece, which sees all the oppressed forces in Greece, which are migrant workers, which are the whole host of new people, and the youth movement itself as being part of what will create a socialist Greece. So I think I'd like to do more analysis and compare the policies of the Communist Party of Greece. I'm sure on lots of them I would agree. And I certainly don't say that the Communist Organization of Greece is by any means perfect. But the point is that the successful communist movement in Greece at the moment is actually coming from the KOE, not from the old communists, for all the old revisionists, basically. So it's the rump of a revisionist party that's left there that's dying, and a new communist movement is being born. But obviously we don't know the future, so we don't know what the final outcome will be, because there's this big battle between the revolutionary pole and the reformist pole within Syria. But so far the Greek comrades are making significant advances within that coalition.
Okay, thank you. What is going to be the future of Europe? Last week, I think the banks are downgraded in UK, such as the mainstream banks, such as HSBC, Barclays, and so on. And on the other hand, Spain is completely down. I don't know whether we can survive further. There are things like that. So there's no hope. They're talking about new world order. On the other hand, the new world order is to give the entire power to the corporates and the banks. So how long they can survive? What is going to be the future of Europe? What is going to happen to the capitalist democracy?
Well, the capitalist democracy in Europe is, as I said, there's a crisis of representative democracy already throughout Europe. Interestingly, one of the first places to face this whole question of the recession in Europe and of the collapse of the banking system was Iceland. And I think it's interesting that Iceland stands out as taking a different path against austerity. Basically, what happened in Iceland, which is it is the oldest democratic system in Europe. It's a very old parliamentary system that goes back over 1,000 years. But there was something in Iceland which was quite interesting, because when these Icelandic banks went abroad and created all these mountains of debt through lots of fraudulent activities, the president of Iceland said that it was not automatic in any way that the taxpayers in Iceland should take on board all the debts accumulated by the banks for all these corrupt activities. Basically what happened was that they had two votes, and the people in Iceland decided they did not want to take on board the debts of these corrupt bankers. Now, they've gone further in Iceland. They've actually prosecuted and actually got returned to Iceland some of the people that were responsible for the corruption of the banking system, and they've given them very long prison sentences. So here we've had which should be an example for the rest of Europe, but it's actually buried in most of the press, what goes on in Iceland, is that the Icelandic people basically rejected taking on board all the banking debts. But in Britain, Ireland, basically every other country in Europe, Spain, Greece, Italy, all the banking debts have been pushed onto the taxpayer. And really, this in itself makes a clear indication that the democracy has been undermined. There's been no exercise of democracy. In fact, in Greece and in Italy, you had the appointment of caretaker governments. So democracy has been fundamentally undermined. There was, the thing about Iceland was it's a good example, but it wasn't followed throughout the rest of Europe. The people didn't actually put the bankers on trial. They didn't get the corrupt people out of the system. In fact, those corrupt people have, in a sense, entrenched themselves more in the system. So that's a very serious problem, and it's a very serious attack on democracy. And one of the problems that we face is that the whole of the left movement in this recession is nothing like the left movement, say, of the 1930s. In the 1930s, you had the Soviet Union, you had mass communist parties, you had the Comintern. So the political movement against all these anti-democratic measures in all these European countries is very weak, and it doesn't. And what that means is that you will see, and you are seeing, the revival of fascist, neo-fascist, different types of nationalist movements emerging to fill the vacuum. I mean, in the same way as when the communist movement, Islam has replaced the communist movement in some parts of the world, in nationalisms of various sorts are sort of emerging in Europe. It's a very serious phenomenon, and this whole question of what fascism is, if you take the literal meaning of fascism as being corporatism, which was Mussolini's idea, then this welding together of the state and the corporations is really occurring in Europe. So in the Mussolini definition of fascism, we're already having corporate states. You know, the state is completely in the hands of the capitalist class in all these countries, and sometimes only within a section of that, the most parasitic and corrupt parts of it are running the state. That operates not just at a national but also at a European level. So there's a very big democratic danger in Europe. And the other French comrades in the French Marxist Party have raised some interesting questions about fascism. Is that everybody tries to look at it in definitions of the 1930s, but actually we should have to redefine it on the basis of the experience of the different sorts of fascism that have emerged, and also take account of the sort of bureaucratic capitalism that emerged in Eastern European and in Russia or the Soviet Union after the Second World War. So I think we need to rethink fascism, and we are in danger sometimes of underestimating the fascist danger, because fascism is a sort of a process, and the history of fascism shows that it comes to power by a combination of undemocratic and democratic actions. And I think the growth of racism and fascism in Europe in this particular environment is also spectacularly shown in Greece, where we got not just a traditional fascist party, but an outright Nazi party, based on all the most vile racism of the Nazi period, getting members. I think there are now about 17 members in the Greek parliament.
So how long they can survive as it is now? There are predictions that up to next summer and so on. I mean, they're talking about new world order and so on. But how long they can survive as it is now? Speculating the prices, speculating the market, and so on. How long they can survive? The Europe.
Well, the problem about capitalism, we've already been into one recession. We've come out partially out of recession, gone back into another one. This is a double dip. We could be in and out of recessions for the next 20, 30 years. Yeah, mm-hmm. All that, it will just impoverish the whole economic and political system and bring out very lethal undemocratic forces like these Greek Nazis or whatever it is that we've seen lately. Obviously, France has got this massive also fascist force within the Front National, which should not be underestimated. So we should seriously be examining and finding new ways to combat these nationalist, so racist forces that are emerging in Europe, because they will gain more traction because the communist movement itself hasn't recovered in Europe. That's the basic problem. There's been no recovery of a revolutionary communist movement in Europe. We talk about Maoists in Europe. I mean, you can count them on handfuls in various countries. There are no really significant Maoist movements in Europe. There are Maoists in different countries at various levels of activity. In Norway, for example, they're quite strong. They strike strong in Greece, but they're completely split and divided in Italy. They are very small in France. There are factions everywhere. So there is an attempt of Italian and French comrades to resurrect a new communist group and a new communist pole in Europe. And we'll see how this sometimes is seen as a new rim or whatever, but there is an attempt to create an organization where there could be more European-wide exchange of information and cooperation. Not a common term, but something that could function on a much broader European level, which could give support to revolutionary politics. But we don't even have that today. So we have to remember, in comparison to the 1930s, the communist movement is incredibly weak in Western Europe and in Europe as a whole. And the process of rebuilding it is starting. But it could take 10, 20, even 30 years. And in that period, I don't see capitalism coming to a crashing end. I see it slowly but systematically going, Europe going into decline. I mean, Wales, where I come from, Wales is part of the United Kingdom, but it is the second poorest country in Western Europe. It wasn't that 30 years ago. It's gone into rapid economic decline over the last 30 years, and that's not going to end. So there's no optimistic outlook. There's very weak communist forces, revolutionary communist forces in Europe. There's a lot of fascism and extreme nationalism about. There's not going to be any significant economic recovery because capitalism, in a way, has almost exhausted itself. But it doesn't mean it won't die until somebody actually kills it or hits it over the head. And the forces to be able to do that are not there yet. So the new world can't be born. Antonio Gramsci made this thing about, it's not capable of giving birth to the new world yet. Yeah, this is part of our problem. So the old world is dying, but the new world is not yet born, and we're in that stage, and it's obviously very worrying because in that stage, if you look at the history, that's when the fascists and the others come to play very significant roles. The only way that fascism could really be defeated is by building a significant communist movement. Yeah, and obviously also much more development of revolutionary communist ideology. But at the moment, I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm an optimist in a general sense of wanting to make things change and better. Again, Gramsci talks about the optimism of the will. You struggle to make things better, but if you use your intelligence and looking at Europe at the moment, you have to be pessimistic because the forces to oppose and change the system are so weak. But it's our duty to build those forces.